I just want to take a moment to tell you that I can see the marketplace, the 100-year-old farmers marketplace, from my window 21 floors down. And there's a trolley free throughout the city that is trundling down the tracks to the marketplace. And it's a beautiful day out. And today there are more cars there than there are parking spaces. And so that means that that's good. The marketplace is always, I mean, this is always very full, but it means that people are out, they're beginning to feel the outside environment again and can come together. But it's a reminder that all over the world, everywhere we go, people are waking up. The future is calling, not just us. The future's been calling for thousands and thousands of years, and people have been waking up and presenting their messages and telling their stories. But today seems to be different. In this major crisis we're having, so many more people seem to be waking up. And as all these visions begin to appear, as all these stories begin to appear, as 7 billion people, large percentage of them, even 8 or 10% of them, come together, it can create gridlock with unintended consequences if we don't know which to support and where to go and how many can we participate in and what happens if I don't support this. Are they going to miss me? How do I do all of this? And so it's really a rich time right now of choices, and choices sometimes are very difficult to make. Steve Jobs reminded us that how do you keep your focus? He says you choose. He said there are 100 good options that you don't choose. So you choose very few, but that's not easy to do. It's really not easy to do. So we're going to talk about patches and nodes now and the work of Stuart Kauffman, because it becomes very, very prevalent here. Just assume that the future has asked us all to participate in creating a future. Well, we're each unique. There are no repeats, even with twins, identical twins, there are differences. So we each have patterns, ways of working, ways of thinking that are different. So how are we going to organize ourselves to actually take advantage of this calling and to find our own magic, our own little piece that weaves together part of the whole? What is this unfolding, this recursion, this that Dee talks about, this fractal, this coming together? Stuart Kauffman was somebody that we began to listen to and try and make sense of his work around the year 2000, I think, 2001, something like that, maybe 97, 98, and he had written a book called oh my gosh, I know this story. Yeah, how could I forget that? I don't know. But the line was at home in the universe in order for free. And he talked about patches and nodes. And he said, when you have a big vision, when you have a big project, and we do have a big project. I mean, if we think of Earth as this huge project that all of us are being called to participate in, how do we organize it? How do you keep from being gridlocked? Because I think our minds can go into, my mind sometimes goes into gridlock. I have so many choices to make. And, you know, and then it goes into entropy because I don't want to do anything. I just blitz out because it's too complex. And so that rhythm that is not taking us into gridlock and not letting us fall out of this unfolding that's taking place is a big question, big question. And Stuart talks about patches and nodes, and he says, you know, we're doing one thing. We're creating a new world. But to do that are many, 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 many patches. Up creation is a patch. And within up creation, we have creating the future, we have donut economics, and donut economics is a patch, and many patches around donut economics are opening the doors and asking these questions. So the whole idea of elder care and how do we take care of ourselves, and all these stories, all of these things. What is a livable city? They're all patches, our patches, and patches among other patches. So how is it that we connect? His idea was that each of us, each of the 7 billion of us, particularly those that want to play, are a node. And there are all these patches going on. Now he says, if the nodes connect, so let's say that I connect to Steve. Steve and I have a relationship, but Steve's connecting to somebody else. And that somebody else is connecting to somebody else. So it's not that Steve and I are doing this double loop all the time. It's that this linear chain is going out and making connections. And yes, of course, we're sharing stories back and forth, but it's going out. All different patches. We've each got networks now beyond up creation. We've each got large networks and they're growing larger. We have choices. It's not so much a matter of joining the networks. It's finding the nodes within the networks that really matters to us now in terms of this up creation. So if we each have 2 or 3 connections, that's all we need, nodes, and we're all noding. And this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. We're sharing what we're learning about our patch. So I'm sharing to Steve what I'm learning about my patch, which doesn't necessarily relate to his, but if everything's related, if we're doing one thing, creating a better world, it does relate in some way. And Steve is listening, and I'm listening back from Steve. And Steve is using what he gets. He's internalizing it. What did Gail say? What does it matter? And then he's going back to his patch, a place, and telling his patch what he thinks matters to them about my information. So he's now optimizing his patch. He's now saying, there's a new piece of information that I think we should consider. That patch has the ability to consider that or drop it. But the story has unfolded. And basically, I'm now received Steve's stuff, but Steve's now connect to Matt or connect to Tom, and he connects with Tom. And he is sharing what he's been learning, which could include a peace of mind if it's been optimized into his. And you begin, Tom, using, you internalize, you use, and you take your information back to your patch and you say, you know, I've really discovered some wonderful things about place that I hadn't thought about before. And I think in our patch of elder, of thinking about how do you become a good elder, or I'm not quite sure what, I think we could really use this. And so these stories are unfolding through all these networks and sharing through my network of Lucille Foundation, through my network of the Sign Network, through my network with the Value Web. And I'm choosing nodes. I'm not just spreading and saying, hey, you all, I want you to listen to me. I'm finding these nodes that care about my stand. And I'm connecting with them. Or, to me, looking at early childhood and changing the whole nature of what early childhood is, and somebody teaching leadership as an adult, they're in relationship with each other. because the more I can understand and the more that person teaching leadership can understand what I'm trying to do with early childhood, and we can have those conversations, it's going to grow richer. So this whole unfolding of, we don't need to know everything. We don't need to participate in everything. But we will be learning together, this unfolding, this pattern developing, the rhythms developing. And if we can tell our story through the patches and nodes, somehow, I think, as Kaufman says, we get order for free. Now, it may take a long time. We're all not going to connect, but unfolding the future takes a long time. And creating the world we want is going to take a long time. It's not going to come next year. It's not going to come when the pandemic's over. It's going to come through many tries over time, through emergence, one conversation. Martina hears from her node, and suddenly there's a transformation. I see things differently. So these are the kinds of conversations. These conversations, by the way, of sharing node to node, they don't need to be long. They might be 20 minutes every 2 weeks. They may be whatever, but they can't be contained. They can't be structured so that they can't be patch to patch, because that's going to create gridlock, and that's going to the beauty of Kaufman says every patch has their own language. Every patch has their own rhythm. So we can't interfere with those. That's a big argument. Well, who's going to win? Whose rhythm? Who's this? Who's that? No, it's the nodes that connect, and they create a rhythm and a texture and a character, leaving the patches free to do their work and assemble this new information that is continually coming in. So that's my story. I know Matt's going to further it a little bit. To me, it's the only hope I have for how we might create this world we want to create.
Am I to start?
Yeah.
I want to take this a little bit and put a little history and a little bit of engineering level defining, because it becomes important. When Kaufman talked about when he came to this theory, part of it is he had become involved in a mathematical analysis of why large energy systems went into gridlock. And not anything that anyone around the United States would be experiencing these days, of course. And so that gave him some ideas of what happened. And then he started thinking about that in terms of what happens with organization. Well, gridlock is a very interesting word. And in my experience, I ran into the term in a big way in the late 50s when I was working in architecture down in Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles was famous for having gridlocks that locked up the streets. And it was interesting to look at the architecture of those gridlocks, because what would happen is one person would come across there and block this, and then the light would change, and then this person blocks this, and they drive right up to one another, like almost, can you even get between the two cars? And then another one coming this way and this way, and then behind them it was happening, and then that would happen for the whole block, and behind that they were doing the same things, intersections on all four sides and all of that, and the horns were honking, and people were yelling at one another, and finally they ended up with hundreds of cars that couldn't move in any direction, forward, back, or what. And the police had to come out and pull this puzzle together. We've all made puzzles where the different pieces have to go in the right order. Well, they had to unorder the pieces in the right order, because if they tried to you couldn't get the cars out. And it would take hours before they could get the cars out. And that gave me this interesting idea of gridlock. And it was interesting that Kaufman used that term of gridlock because when patches try to communicate large pieces of information to other patches, whether they're patches within inside the patches or patches outside like this, what can happen is that the information flow itself goes into gridlock. Because what we're talking about here is math. What we're talking about here is structure. What we're talking about here is the architecture of how things go together. And that over communicating, that over signaling can do that very badly. And so when Gail and I first heard about this, we decided to test it and see if in our process we could run a rather rigorous test to see if in fact you could keep patches away from one another over an extended period of time, and just with certain node by rules that those patches could all come together. And when so we were doing this design shop, and we had all the people get in a circle and throw a ball of yarn or something all the way around. So everyone ended up with a line to someone and for someone. It's a very nice picture, and it was put in a magazine. The editor was there, and he was doing a thing on us, and so he used it as the picture, the title of our extended explanation of our work.
Fast Company.
Yeah, Fast Company. Fast Company, it was one of the very first things that they did when they were very young and starting out. And so what we did is we had a design shop from multiple organizations. There was about 5 or 6 organizations. All of them were our clients in one way or another, and then some wild cards that came in. And we had the 3-day typical design shop, Scan, Focus, Act. And we went into the ACT day where everyone had chosen their groups. And then before they went, we had them do this node thing. And here were the rules. They were to work on their piece of the work of the total thing that they were to walk away with at the end of the day, and not communicate patch to patch. But they were to have their nodes go out. We would have their nodes go out on certain calls. And the nodes were just to have conversations about what they were experiencing and hearing. And the nodes could then go back and say, well, here's an idea. I've been thinking about this or that. That was the only communication we allowed through the whole 3rd day, which was a big risk of whether it was going to be success or failure. So this was a pretty rigorous test of Kaufman's theory at that time, in the dynamics of people communicating and working and solving problems together from different organizations and patches. And what was beautiful, when the report out time came, the teams came out, they did their report out in order, they put their hyper tiles up, big radiant wall, laid it all out, scribbling it, and it all came down to the end, and it was perfect. There wasn't a hole, there wasn't a missing piece, there wasn't the failure of hearing. Now, in a traditional way of working, the patches would have tried to communicate and get information from one another, and what you would have gotten was conceptual gridlock. You would have gotten a thing that got so tied up it couldn't be unraveled. But the nodes did their job. And what's important to understand, we didn't explain patchworks. We just said, this is the way you're going to work. So it was a pretty pure test. And so the idea here of patchworks is pretty rigorous. And it's an important thing in the creation of organizations working together, or even a large organization like a General Motors. Our clients at that time were General Motors and FAA and US Air Force and NASA and stuff like that. So we were working with clients at that period of time that were very, very large and very complex, and always getting into the communication issue. And a lot of those people were the people that come with to this design shop from those organizations. So the rules, the structure and the rules of how patches and nodes work is a very important design when you set up the architecture of patches and nodes. And if you set that architecture up with a good rule-based system that's very simple, it doesn't take long to explain this, you know. Matter of fact, when you tell them to do it, you don't have to go as long as we're going right now. And just say, work this way. What happens is that the entire organization becomes much freer, and the communication flow goes through it in an organic and very effective way, without the organization, particularly the hierarchies demanding control through all this, then prevents the flow of valuable information through the organism. And so anyway, that's my kind of comment on it. But the patches and nodes architecture, when working with multiple organizations on complex issues, as far as I'm concerned, has passed the test of how to prevent the gridlock, the conceptual organizational gridlock. And by the way, I want to go back to the original story. What do people do in the street when there's gridlock? They scream at one another, they yell at one another, they honk their horns, they get out of the car, they pound on hoods and stuff like that. That's the metaphor that happens to a large set of organizations that get into gridlock. Not that the US government would ever demonstrate this kind of behavior. So people try to solve that by having more of what caused it, rather than backing out and letting the organization become a better design. End of story.
So one more sentence here. Over the last 10 or 15 years, organizations have been too rigid. And so we've organized patches and nodes, but they don't work. People, the patches and the control it's not free enough. It's not ordered enough. But here's D presenting a future of global control by we the people. Okay, we the people, that's us. We're the nodes. We've got the vision. We're part of this recreation. We're part of creating this new paradigm as it's shifting. And if we, node to node, we get organization for free. We get self-organizing systems. Kaufman calls it enabling. One thing enables another. He doesn't say we cause things to happen. We enable things to happen. We enable Dee's project to become richer and richer through these stories and optimizing. So it's a whole different concept that we've grown up with in terms of structure and organization. And those of you working in large consultant companies, it's not going to be easy for you to shift this, but you can play with it. And perhaps it'll fall into place, because basically, as Matt and I have said over and over and over with each event we do, we're not talking to the organization, we're talking to the people within the organization. It is people to people that we're talking with, not the organization. And if we remember that, it makes it much easier to give people the freedom